Hey everybody, it's your good friend Terrence here, and over the past few days and in some discussion posts I've been seeing in my online classes and even a few conversations I've been having with students, I've had a pretty cool question asked, or I guess I should say a pretty warm question asked, which is, why is it still hot even in October here in Southern California, or in Northern California and Southern California? And the other question I've been getting asked a lot is, why does it get so windy this time of year? And so what I actually wanted to do is take a few minutes and actually explain what is happening in particular during this time of year. So before I can do that, there's a little bit of geography I need to go over, and so let me jump in and talk about it. So this map I have on here right now is of what we like to call the southwestern quarter of the United States. So here's California, where we are. Hello. And then further inland, we have Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and so on. Well, during this time of year, most of the country is beginning to experience a pretty noticeable cool down. Temperatures are going from the 90s, 80s, 90s, 100s to more like the 60s, 50s, and in some cases even 40s. On the other hand, specifically here in the desert regions, they're experiencing some of the biggest cool downs across the entire nation. And in particular, the Great Basin region can actually see really, really drastic cooling. So I'll write that here. Really drastic cooling in the month of October. Now, on the other hand, over here, over California, we are a coastal region. And one of the things that's interesting about a coastal region is that ocean water doesn't get cold nearly as fast. So really what's happening is while the inland desert regions are starting to cool down, we still stay relatively warm. Now, that being said, let me just write that here. Sorry for my terrible handwriting. So, that being said, how does this actually create wind? Well, something that I love to talk about in my classes is what's called the two-column model of atmospheric circulation. If you haven't heard it yet, you will hear it at some point in my class. So, here's basically what happens is in cool regions, you get lots of sinking air. Sinking air creates high pressure at the surface. So here over the mountain region, here over the Great Basin region, we have lots of cool sinking air. And it's that cool sinking air that produces high pressure near the surface. On the other hand, relatively speaking, it's still pretty warm here along the California coastline. And in fact, one of the things that happens in the fall time is coastal upwelling, which actually really creates cold water, begins to slacken off. And so the waters actually warm up a little bit. And this warming creates more rising air. Well, rising air creates low pressure at the surface. So we end up getting high pressure and cooler air over the Great Basin, and low pressure and warmer air over the coastal regions. Now, something I'm going to talk about in this class at some point is what's called the pressure gradient force. And the idea behind the pressure gradient force is that Mother Nature hates imbalance. And what I mean by that is that a natural system tries to achieve balance. When you have a region with high pressure next to a region with low pressure, air will begin to move from the high pressure down to the low pressure. Now here's where geography comes into this. If this was just a typical high to low, we might just get a little extra wind, no big deal. But the Great Basin and many of the regions in Nevada and Utah and in the interior western United States have elevations of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet. And between the Great Basin and coastal California, we have the Sierra Nevada right here, Sorry for the clicking of my mouse as I'm drawing this, but we have the Sierra Nevada. Then over here we have the Diablo Range. And then the Coastal Range. And then down here near Southern California, we have a range called the Transverse Range. So a couple of things actually happen to this wind as it's blowing from the high pressure over the Great Basin to the low pressure along our coastline. The first thing that happens is in order for it to even get to us, it has to rise up and over the Sierra Nevadas. Now that being said, when air goes up and over a mountain, two things happen to it. The first thing that happens to it is it dries out. And that's because any moisture is wrung out, is condensed as the air travels up the mountain. The other thing that happens is when the mountain comes down the other side, it compresses and it warms. So by the time this cold, high-pressure air from the Great Basin makes it over to California, it quickly becomes very hot. And I'm talking temperatures of 80, 90, mid-90s. It can get pretty hot. And it also becomes very dry. So we have this hot, let me draw that here, hot and dry air that makes its way down from the Sierra Nevada and into the Central Valley. Okay, with that being said, sometimes the air has other paths of least resistance. It doesn't just go up and over mountains. Sometimes what it'll actually do is it'll actually channel its way between two mountains. When this happens, this creates a phenomenon called convergence. And think about a river. When a river is really wide, the stream typically is flowing very, very gently. However, if the stream were to suddenly become narrow, all of that water is now being pushed. There's a lot of pressure pushing that water into that narrow stream. That causes it to speed up. So what actually happens is as these winds channel their way through many of the mountains, Sierra Nevada included, but also the Diablo Range, the Coastal Range, and the Transverse Range, that forces the wind to become really fast. So the wind heats up as it makes its way down, as it makes its way from the Great Basin down to the coastline. It dries out as it goes up and over these mountains, and as it travels through canyons, channels, passes, and whatever, it speeds up. So by the time it reaches us, it's hot, it's dry, and it's windy. If you've ever heard of the term Santa Ana winds, those are these winds in Southern California. So let me draw that here, Santa Ana. And they call it the Santa Ana winds because Santa Ana in Orange County in California tends to be one of the windiest places in Southern California, which is why they call them the Santa Ana winds. Up here, these winds are traveling through the Diablo Range, so we oftentimes call them the Diablo winds. Diablo. The Diablo winds. But basically the same process is creating them. Now the last thing I'll say about this is when we get all of these hot, dry winds after a period of prolonged dry weather, which is what we get in summer, that's when we start to experience extreme fire weather. It's dry, it's hot, it's windy. That's the trifecta for fire. You have lots of fuel, you have low moisture, and you end up having very windy conditions. That can create sparks, that can cause fires to grow and spread really fast. So this isn't just why it's warm, it's also why fires happen during this time of year as well. So That's it. This actually puts together a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about, things like adiabatic heating and cooling, and it also covers some stuff that we will talk about over the next few weeks. So that's it. I hope that you found it interesting. I hope that it was a nice little tidbit to sort of take everything that we've been learning and really show an applicability, really show how this is actually present in our everyday life. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right, thanks for watching.